A continuing fight against starvation, disease and poverty is waged by the United Nations Children's Fund in 117 different countries. About half the children in the world, 800 million of them, don't get enough to eat. Some are dying from starvation, others are too weak to survive disease. We're going to show you what's being done now, today, in just a few of the 117 countries in which the Children's Fund is working. This newsreel consists of pieces of film, some made by amateurs, pieced together to illustrate how these gigantic problems are being actively tackled during the winter of 1968 to 1969. Although these islands of the Philippines are so beautiful, about 400,000 children and mothers go hungry. Rice is their main food, and there's not enough land for the crowded population. Extra food is being distributed. But much more important is the teaching of children and the mothers how to grow their own food. The village leaders and teachers are taught the value of new foods. Vegetable gardens are being introduced into schools and villages, and everyone, especially the children, is learning how to cultivate them. As part of their training, the mothers are all encouraged to bring along the food they've prepared to be shared out among the children. War in Nigeria is driving thousands from their homes and villages without food. In the famine, children are dying by the thousand, as many as 4,000 every day of the week. The Children's Fund had been working in Nigeria for many years, teaching children and mothers how to grow food, how to arrange for clean water supplies, setting up health clinics, and training staff. The fund turned immediately to cope with the emergency, bringing in 5,000 tons of food a month, enough to feed 750,000. To reach starving thousands in remote areas with no roads, 6 helicopters are distributing about £1 million of food a week. Medical equipment and supplies have already been sent to 600 depots for 600,000 children and mothers. From the swampy tropical coastlands, a maze of creeks and rivers runs scores of miles into the interior. These waterways teem with fish upon which the villagers rely. But in the war, the armies have put the waterways out of bounds and the fishermen are idle. Hundreds of villages have lost their essential source of protein in their diet and also transport by boat. Inland, it's been a bad year for the very limited amount of crops planted. The fruits of the harvest are being quickly exhausted, and a devastating famine threatens 2 million people. In the hope that there will soon be an end to this terrible tragedy and the starving to death of so many children, preparations are already being made for the long struggle back to normal. Hundreds of thousands of children and mothers have to be nursed back to health and given a better life. Being entirely dependent upon voluntary contributions, the Children's Fund is making a special appeal for funds throughout the world, for very substantial expenditure is inevitable, far beyond present resources of the fund. it plays a leading part in most emergencies, in Vietnam, the Middle East, and the drought in India, the Children's Fund concentrates upon long-term programs to help people to help themselves. High up in the Andean mountains of South America live 7 million people, the descendants of the once mighty Incas, reduced to starving poverty. They're being taught how to make clothes more quickly, to grow more and better food, with health clinics to control disease and encourage sanitation. If babies and young children are to survive and be healthy, they must have milk. And in most of the underdeveloped countries, that is one item of food in short supply. Thousands of tons of dried milk are being distributed by the Children's Fund, but that can only be a temporary stopgap measure. Every country has to be encouraged to produce enough fresh milk for its babies and young children. This was the problem in Kenya, with about 5 million children under 15 years of age, many suffering from malnutrition leading to shocking diseases. With the help of the Children's Fund, the government of Kenya is creating a new dairy industry. Herds of cows have been reared, a large milk pasteurization plant has been built. Cooperatives have been formed to collect, process, and distribute the milk. In those parts of Kenya which cannot be reached with liquid milk, dried milk is being supplied. This is a slow, gradual build-up, but it will not be long before Kenya has a dairy industry large enough to supply all its babies and young children, opening the way for a new and healthier generation free from hunger and disease. The Children's Fund will have spent a large amount, but it will have been so worthwhile. Throughout the centuries, India has suffered from drought, the most recent being in Bihar, where 52 million people gradually lost all their crops and water supplies and were dying from starvation and disease. With the cooperation of the Indian government and many volunteers, health centers were set up and food and water were distributed. But this relief can only be temporary. A search for more water has begun. The Children's Fund has brought in drilling rigs, and they're now sinking deep wells at key points. Every day throughout the year, in 117 different countries, the Children's Fund is making more progress in protecting babies, young children, and mothers from hunger, disease, and poverty. Over £18 million is being spent this year. But the problems are so vast and worldwide that the help and cooperation of everyone is going to be essential for many years to come.